Hello and welcome to Ahval Podcasts, the home of objective, up-to-date and independent reporting on Turkey. Don't forget to follow our reports through social media, on ahvalnews.com or through our mobile app. Let's get started.
Hello, welcome to the Ahval Podcast. Today I am joined by the Senior Vice President of Research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, a Washington-based think tank, and the former terror finance analyst for the U.S. Treasury, Jonathan Schanzer. My first question would be Halkbank indictment. Apparently, you are one of the experts in Washington, D.C., authority over the issue. You are the former terror finance analyst for the U.S. Treasury. Just yesterday, the Halkbank indictment dropped. Can you please, first of all, summarize the indictment for our listeners?
Sure. Well, the case stems from a sanctions evasion scheme that Halkbank was involved in from 2012 to 2015. The U.S. government amassed a huge amount of information pointing to Halkbank, which is Turkey's second largest state-owned lender, in its involvement in this case. It basically involved money laundering done on behalf of the Iranian regime right at the height of the sanctions that were placed against Tehran for its nuclear program, and Turkey inexplicably decided to help Iran move money right when we needed that money to be frozen. There was a case that took place about 2 years ago where one of the bankers, Mehmet Hakan Atilla, was found guilty in a New York court. And then from there was a long, drawn-out negotiation between the U.S. government and Halkbank, and presumably the Turkish government itself, over the fine that the bank should pay. In the past, banks have typically wanted to quickly pay the fine so that they could go back to rebuilding trust, public trust in the bank. And we have seen multiple banks fined over the years for reasons that are now still unclear. Halkbank refused to negotiate. And for a while, it appeared anyway that the Trump administration was not going to press the issue. But in the aftermath of the Turkish invasion of northern Syria over the weekend, the Trump administration has changed course. They've now indicted Halkbank, and so the question now will be, what does Halkbank do in return? Do they try to defend themselves? And how would they do so? These are questions that we'll have to answer in the coming weeks and months ahead.
The Treasury had a press release yesterday, and there were some serious charges, including money laundering, defrauding the United States, bank fraud. You said that the Halkbank has been negotiating or refusing to come to the table. Was this the only reason this took about 2 years to come to this point?
My understanding is that the Trump administration was halting the Department of Justice case from moving forward, probably because of concerns regarding the U.S.-Turkey alliance, or perhaps because Turkey was agreeing to work with the United States in this safe zone in northern Syria. Perhaps it had something to do with the fight against ISIS or Turkey's housing of refugees. In other words, there were a number of things that Turkey has been doing that perhaps placated the Trump administration. But with the decision to invade Syria and the humanitarian crisis that appears to be unfolding, the Trump administration has been under immense pressure to do something, to respond to Turkey's aggression. And I believe what has happened here is that the Trump administration has lowered the shield, so to speak, with regard to Turkey, that they allowed this to go through.
How do you comment to those who have commented that this is kind of a part of a so-called deep state versus Trump, part of the deep state versus Trump fight, or the part of the impeachment, or the part of the case against Rudy Giuliani, President Trump's lawyer. How do you see this argument?
Well, look, I think the president himself announced that he was going to impose severe sanctions and penalties against Turkey for its actions in Syria. And so I don't believe that this has been done without the president's knowledge. I think that this is probably an extension of the president's policy in this regard. The notion of going after Halkbank for its alleged criminal activity was actually something that was set to appear in congressional sanctions anyway. So the president may have preempted this action and done it himself. As for Rudy Giuliani, there have been multiple reports that he represented Reza Zarrab, who was the key money launderer in the first phase of the case against Halkbank, and he eventually turned state's witness. But Mr. Giuliani certainly represented him and did so very publicly. And now there are reports that he may have made an effort to try to get the Turkish cleric Fethullah Gülen extradited to Turkey as well. So he appears to have been involved in a number of issues relating to Turkey, but his exact role is unclear, and whether he's in any trouble for these things is also unclear at this moment.
How about the timing? This just came a day before Mr. Vice President Pence and the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's visit to Ankara.
Well, their visit comes in response to the Turkish invasion of northern Syria. It also comes in the aftermath of a number of sanctions or sanctions authorities that have been announced against Turkey. So in other words, the U.S. government is now trying to place significant pressure on Ankara in order to get the Turkish military and its proxies to halt their invasion of northern Syria. So this is all happening, I think, in a way that is designed to give Pence and Mr. O'Brien, the National Security Advisor, it's designed to give them some leverage at the negotiating table with Recep Tayyip Erdoğan. Whether Mr. Erdoğan agrees to stand down is another story entirely. Reports suggest this morning that he is not at all inclined to acquiesce to the president's demands.
So there is a chance then the U.S. authorities, led by Pence and Pompeo, can bargain over this indictment. Is this the right kind of understanding?
I don't know if at this point that this can go away. My understanding is once this indictment has been unsealed, I don't believe the U.S. government can roll it back. And so there may be other things that the U.S. government can do to ease some pressure on Turkey, certainly with regard to sanctions authorities and potential penalties imposed through the Treasury. But once a Justice Department indictment is unsealed, as was the case here, it's not possible to turn back.
I understand. Today, Halkbank issued a statement, and they said that they are not going to discuss the issue, and they reject the indictment. What does it mean? What would be the next from now on?
We don't know, quite frankly. I mean, this is a unique situation in that no bank has up until now refused to negotiate a fine with the United States for sanctions evasion. Most banks are very fearful of losing access to the U.S. system, and they're fearful of what an indictment or a penalty might mean for their access to the broader global financial system because of the fact that the U.S. controls it. So the fact that Halkbank or the Turkish government have refused to engage up until now was something that U.S. authorities had never dealt with before. I do believe that Halkbank has tested the patience of the Justice Department, and we are now watching this case move forward. Now, the Halkbank or the Turkish government have an opportunity, if they wish, to defend themselves, and they can do so at the in a court now and through legal proceedings, which I think are very balanced. And of course, the U.S. has a judicial system that can be trusted by all sides. But if the Turkish government refuses, then I think it will be up to a judge to ultimately make a unilateral decision based on evidence provided only by the U.S. government against Halkbank.
Is there any way you can tell us what kind of, if Halkbank continues to reject the indictment and they won't participate in such trial, what would be the possible punishment by the U.S. court?
Well, I think there's two likely outcomes. One is that a fine is issued, and the fine could be rather significant. The largest sanctions busting penalty thus far was against BNP Paribas, the French bank, and that was $9 billion. The sanctions evasion scheme perpetrated by Halkbank was far greater. It was $20 billion worth of illicit financial transactions and could come close to that in terms of the penalty. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that it's quite possible that if the bank continues to refuse to cooperate, you could see the United States impose what we call a 311. This is invoking Section 311 of the Patriot Act, which could declare the bank an institution of illicit financial activity, which would basically make it toxic in the financial community and really block the bank from doing business around the world. This would, I think in both cases, we may see the dismantling of the bank, and that may be why the Erdoğan government continues to refuse to negotiate.
Wow. How about Turkish government decides to shut down the Halkbank and then opens up a brand new bank, and then they say we have nothing to do with Halkbank?
I think it would all depend on how it was done and whether it was done in coordination with the United States and whether assets from Halkbank were paid in penalty. I think that at this point, at least my sense is that the Department of Justice and Treasury have been very patient and are waiting for a reckoning, an admission of guilt by the Turkish government, or at least some settlement. And I don't believe that simply shutting a bank down and opening up another one will be sufficient in this case. But then again, I don't work for the U.S. government, and I just don't know what the demands would be.
The indictment about the officials at the Halkbank, but also there are some references to, without naming names, it goes to then Prime Minister Erdoğan and his ministers, and including his son-in-law. What kind of people we may see in this indictment as a defendants?
Well, in this case right now, we're really only looking at Halkbank itself. They are the ones who are targeted in this particular indictment. I have to believe that there are other sealed indictments, in other words, indictments that have not yet been made public by the Department of Justice, and there may yet be other figures from the Turkish government at the time of the Halkbank revelations. So 2013, 14, 15, we might see Turkish officials from that time frame eventually indicted, although, again, we have no indication because there's only been 2 indictments, or 3 actually, that have been now unsealed. One against Zarab, and Zarab has become a witness for the state. And then Mehmet Hakan Atilla, who was a banker for Halkbank and was ultimately found guilty in court. And now the next indictment is Halkbank itself. But I do think it's interesting if you look at the indictment of Halkbank that was unsealed, it does reference then Prime Minister Erdoğan. I believe that there may be a message there that if Erdoğan doesn't begin to cooperate, that he or those close to him may also find themselves under indictment, and perhaps that might be a way of applying some pressure.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. This has been an excellent and very insightful. There are lots of information we have heard, and I am going to try to digest this. Thanks so much for your time. We much appreciated and grateful.
Very, very welcome.